Our first reading this morning is from the prophet Isaiah, chapter 58. The people say, "Why do we fast, but you do not see? Why humble ourselves, but you do not notice?" And God responds, speaking through the prophet, "On the day of your fasting, you do as you please and exploit all your workers. Your fasting ends in quarreling and strife, and in striking each other with wicked fists. You cannot fast as you do today and expect your voice to be heard on high. Is this the kind of fast I have chosen? Only a day for people to humble themselves? Is it only for bowing one's head like a reed, and for lying in sackcloth and ashes? Is that what you call a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? Is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen? To loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them, and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood? Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and God will say, 'Here I am.'"
The second reading is from Matthew 5, 13 through 20. Hear these words of Jesus from the Sermon on the Mount. "Let me tell you why you are here. You're here to be salt seasoning that brings out the God flavors of this earth. If you lose your saltiness, how will people taste godliness? You've lost your usefulness and you'll end up in the garbage. Here's another way to put it. You're here to be light, bringing out the God colors in this world. God is not a secret to be kept. We're going public with this, as public as a city on a hill. If I make you light bearers, you don't think I'm going to hide you under a bucket, do you? I'm putting you on a light stand. Now that I put you there on a hilltop, on a light stand, it's time to shine. Keep open house. Be generous with your lives. By opening up to others, you'll prompt people to open up with God. Be generous, Father in heaven. Don't suppose for a minute that I have come to demolish the scriptures, either God's law or the prophets. I'm not here to demolish, but to complete. I'm going to put it all together in a vast panorama. God's law is more real and lasting than the stars in the sky and the ground at your feet. Long after stars burn out and the earth wears out, God's law will be alive and working. Trivialize even the smallest item in God's law, and you will only have trivialized yourself. But take it seriously. Show the way for others, and you will find honor in the kingdom. Unless you do far better than the Pharisees in the matters of right living, you won't know the first thing about entering the kingdom.
The children's television program that many of us have loved as Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood evolved from modest beginnings. For 10 years, Fred Rogers worked behind the scenes on early NBC children's programming as a musician and a puppet man, invisible to the camera. Then the head of programming at the CBC in Canada, also in its early days, invited him to create a daily 15-minute show on camera. "Fred," he said, "I've seen you talk with kids. Let's put you yourself on the air." It worked. Enough that 4 years later, Rogers found the confidence for a really big gamble. He bought the rights to the name Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, moved with his wife and 2 young children back home to Pittsburgh, together with a trolley set, a castle, and a pair of new sneakers. I persuaded WQED Pittsburgh to hire him. The new show was taken up by the Eastern Educational Network, one of the early collaborative networks between local public television stations. That was before they all joined to become the PBS. So it aired across a handful of eastern states. A year later, the management at WGBH Boston got a bright idea. They would invite Mr. Rogers to their studio for a Meet the Host event, April 1967. Come on, kids, bring your parents. Mr. Rogers is coming to Boston. They guessed that 500 people might show up. 5,000 came. The line stretched down the street towards Soldiers Field, where the Harvard football team played, writes one person, recalling the day. It created traffic slowdowns reminiscent of game days. The station quickly ran out of snacks for the children. As the line wound into the studio, Rogers insisted on kneeling to talk with each child. I'm just impressed by all that kneeling. The queue got longer and longer until it stretched clear past the stadium. It's an episode that sums up who he was and why he had such an impact on so many lives. Every single child mattered to him. It wasn't an act. It was how he saw it. If those children wanted to meet him for themselves after seeing him on television, if there was something they wanted to tell him, he would be there for them, every single one of them. They might have a long wait in line, but they would not be disappointed. He wouldn't let them down. With their hope and their vulnerability, those individual children were more important than a major TV studio's convenience or gridlock on the city streets. Mr. Rogers existed to share the unconditional love of God with every child, actually every person he encountered. There would be no shortcuts and no compromises. Nobody would be shortchanged. Contrast that with the story of another children's television host. Christian journalist Amy Hollingsworth tells about sitting on a train heading for Pittsburgh the day that she was first due to interview Mr. Rogers. But she didn't have Mr. Rogers on her mind. She was thinking about Uncle Al. She says he wasn't her real uncle. Uncle Al, along with his cape-donning wife, Captain Windy, was an accordion-playing local legend in her hometown with his own children's show on her local station. She had loved him as a child. She'd even appeared on his show once with one of her sisters. But then one day, she heard from some friends that Uncle Al had chased from his porch some children who had come looking for treats on Halloween. My childhood psyche quickened, she writes, dislodging the memory of loss of innocence that occurred when I first discovered that people are not always what they seem. But then she met Mr. Rogers. She went on to write a book about the profound experience of becoming friends with someone who absolutely was the person he appeared to be on the camera. When I think about being salt and light, about being a city set on a hill together, those stories challenge me. How is the love of God wanting to find expression through us as a church? Who needs to experience it through us? What gets in the way? Week by week, I wonder, is it real light we're offering or just some pretense, some lesser kind of light that we manufacture in-house? People hold churches to high, high standards, not unlike children with their heroes. When people come here, does the reality match the image? 2 weeks ago at our annual meeting, we authorized the creation of a new task force to examine the welcome that we give as a congregation when newcomers come to worship with us. Now, there's a whole marketplace of gimmicks that churches use. You hear, give them a mug or give them a ballpoint pen with the name of the church on it, right? That isn't what Helen has in mind. When we met this week to begin putting shape to the work, her whole conversation was about personal warmth and care. She even sounded a little bit like Mr. Rogers at one point. She said, our welcome needs to include the children, always. Our welcomers need to be sure to talk with them and then take them up and show them the children's area upstairs and explain that they're welcome. They can join the other children up there, or if they prefer, they're welcome to stay down here, whatever is more comfortable for them. There is a special vulnerability in walking through the doors of a church for the first time. We all know it. We've all been there. Every one of us has responsibility for what those people will experience, what they'll see, whether the reality matches up to whatever hope they've brought with them. And it's a tall order, since the hope might not be anything they could articulate. But maybe, like children, we all have a built-in homing device for the unconditional love of God. We hunger for it. When we encounter it, we recognize it. We want more. So how do you embody that love? According to Fred Rogers, there are 3 ways. The first way is to be kind, he said. The second way is to be kind. The third way is to be kind. Are those words as devastating to you as they are to me? All I can think of is how often I failed, here included, all of the times I've been in too much of a hurry to talk to somebody, too much of a rush, too impatient, or just haven't listened well enough, or I've been maybe too consumed with being right. There's no virtue in being right at the expense of somebody else's vulnerability. This week we had a Bible study meeting here at the church that I can't stop thinking about. We've been working our way through the 10 Commandments on Thursday mornings. And initially, Ginny, our leader, wondered whether there was enough to talk about. No other gods before me? She says, I don't worship any other gods. Check. Now what? But then we dug into our loyalties and what other gods there might actually be lurking in the shadows. Gods we worship by the way we spend our money or spend our time or whatever. Suddenly there was a whole lot more to it. Don't take the Lord's name in vain. I don't swear, says Ginny, check. But then we dug into everything that's involved in truly honoring the name of God that brought us up short. Honor your father and mother, check. What else are all those trips back east about? But then the study book challenged us to be ourselves the kind of life givers who deserve honoring, and not only by our own children, but by their children and theirs to 7 generations. Then what do we do about climate change? And suddenly for me, what we've heard Jesus say this morning about God's law being more real and lasting than the stars in the sky or the ground beneath our feet makes a whole lot more sense. If you take those ancient commandments seriously, if you approach them with respect for what they have to say, then there are layers to them, layers of holiness and goodness and full life and integrity. Integrity so deep, you'll never plumb the depths of it. Not with a lifetime of striving, which brings Scripture to life, which also makes every day an opportunity to grow. Well, this week we arrived at thou shalt not murder. Check, we all said. None of us had murdered anybody, that, at least not that we were willing to admit to in the last few weeks. But then Ginny pointed us to a definition she'd written on the board. Murder, the death of a body, or a spirit, or a hope for the future. And even at that point, we could have kept it abstract and distant and unthreatening, but then somebody took the risk of talking what it actually felt like to be there that morning after the Iowa caucuses and the impeachment vote and the White House prayer breakfast that had just been on TV. And other people chimed in. And within half an hour, there was so much vulnerability in the room, so much distress and fear and fragility that I wondered, why don't we ever talk about this stuff? How do we expect the love of God to be able to reach us through one another if we're all carrying so much distress and we never talk about it? God is waiting to be real for us, but surely we have to be real first. Surely that's how it works. Mr. Rogers would say, Anything that is mentionable is manageable. We should never be afraid to talk. Nothing is forbidden. Bring it out into the open. If you can be brave enough to talk about it, it will be okay. Maybe not right away, not that life doesn't hurt, but there will always be helpers, he said. And you are stronger than you know. You are the salt of the earth, Jesus said. You are the light of the world. Not could be, or even should be. You are. Your caring is what can make the difference to somebody's darkness. So don't hide your humanity under a bushel basket. It belongs on a lampstand where it can give light to all the house. First, be kind. Second, be kind. Third, be kind. Let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Amen, Lord, let it be. We share our resources to make it all possible. Your gifts will now be received.